sluts. It's everybody's favorite pimp here. 22nd of ER 5786, Saturday, May 9th. I've been doing this bitch 134 days. Elevate Elohim. No elevate Elohim. Chaim. No one really knows for sure. No one really knows for sure. Elevate Elohim Chaim, but this is the ones I live by. All Sephirot HaOmer. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and commanded us concerning the counting of the Omer. Today is $38 days, which is 5 weeks and 3 days of the Omer. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash speedily in our days. Amen. Salah. $37.61 creation of the world, birth of Adam and Eve. Chava. 36:31 1:30 Seth, son of Adam, was born. 35:26 2:35 Enosh, son of Seth, was born. 34:36 3:25 Kenan, son of Enosh, was born. 33:66 3:95 Mahalalel, son of Kenan, was born. 33:01 4:60 Yared, son of Mahalalel, was born.
Where we explore the history Kabbalah is just one thing at all. Of course, notions isn't really tenable. Such notions developed greatly through the ages and are still developing. And there are now, and there have always been, numerous mutually exclusive schools of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. This class is meant to serve as an introduction to Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah from the point of view of its incredibly complex development from the prophets of ancient Israel and to the rise of modern Hasidism in the 18th century. Of course, this series isn't meant to be exhaustive by any means, but only should serve as a springboard for study and reflection. Also enable you to situate developments in Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah in their historical and cultural context, and hopefully embolden you to dive into the primary texts, which are admittedly as sublime as they are obscure. Let me express my gratitude to Congregation Tia for allowing me to use these lectures to reach a larger audience here on Esoterica. If you want, you can find entire series under the playlist entering the Garden Introduction Jewish. I'll be uploading them over the next few weeks, or if you fix episodes after autumn of 2021 and you want to watch the entire series, you can find them in that playlist. If you find this series on Kabbalah interesting, I'd hope you check out my other content on topics of esotericism and perhaps consider supporting the production of free academic and scholarly topics in occultism, hermetic philosophy by joining my Patreon or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below, and I really appreciate your consideration. Now, let's get the garden of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. All right, everybody. I really can't believe I'm saying this, but after 13 sessions, we are now on session 14 of this, what was supposed to be a 9-series exploration of Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. And of course, 14 sessions is still too few. I keep teaching this last day a week for the rest of my life, and still not exhaust all the things there are to say about Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. And I'll be also very honest, this last session is going to in some ways be the thinnest, because this is where my expertise really runs out. And I'll be very frank about that. It's just honestly the case. My expertise, I hit a wall, and my wall really is, I don't know as nearly as much about Hasidism as I probably should. Still learning about Hasidism, and everything from roughly the 18th to the 21st century is where my gap is. Everyone has gaps in their knowledge, and I think it's important to acknowledge the gaps in our knowledge, not to pretend we know things we don't. And it's definitely from Hasidism for that that's a real gap in anything. But there are certainly people who know a lot more than I do. In fact, I'm just invited a good friend of mine to do some talks, maybe at least a talk at Congregation about Hasidism, because I really do feel like I gave it short shrift and it deserved a lot more attention, a lot more deep attention than I gave it. And so I reached out to a good friend of mine who knows a lot about Hasidism to make me learn. So we'll see if that works out. I would say welcome to the end, but it's not God. Because, of course, Kabbalah is not going to go away. Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah is doing actually a lot better now.
The coach in general will tell you that you'll make a Rothschild with that for the special being at a place that
the middle of the 20th century, I would say that Kabbalah, in some ways, was at death's door. And it's doing much better now. So, in a substantial way, we're not saying goodbye to Kabbalah, rather, we're saying dot. It's going to continue to grow and change. And I've heard really cool and exciting things about developments in the Haredi world, where we're in sort of new and dynamic Kabbalistic thought. And if we do end up moving to Palestine for a few months next year, I'm looking forward to kind of getting into that and seeing what's going on in the Kabbalistic world in Jerusalem. Well, as we marked last time, the sort of post-Shabbatite world is, I would say that it's actually more sophisticated in many ways than the Shabbatite world. The Shabbatite world is marked by a relatively thin understanding of Kabbalah. So successful is that people really didn't understand what was going on. They weren't really versed in Kabbalah. And when you read something of a very technical nature, you can be overwhelmed by it and very convinced by things that simply aren't really true or deep. They can sound deep, but they're not. And I think that's true of a lot of things that went on in the Shabbat. It sounded Kabbalistic and had a Kabbalistic veneer, but if you scratch the surface even a bit, you realize that the kind of reasoning that justified this stuff that went on with Shabbat to be in frame, facile, to the surface of it, realize gilding abandoned pretty quickly. So the years after Shabbatai speaks apostasy and after the whole business, what you get is a kind of conservative backlash in the world of Kabbalah. That shouldn't be surprising. This whole Shabbatai. And so, what in closing of ranks? In the Kabbalistic world, after this, what people have been doing is returning to the period, returning to the Kabbalah much like it was in the period before Shabbatai, where things were a bit more closed off, a bit more guarded, a bit more silent, which I think is probably not always for the worst. And so the developments within Kabbalah, in fact, the developments in Kabbalah since then have been relatively conservative, which is to say, we don't see major developments outside of there's never really been a significant post-Luria in Kabbalah. It's at some point become commentary footnotes to Isaac Luria. And so that relatively conservative moment, that relatively conservative movement marks Kabbalah from about the mid until now. And as we talked about last time, two major Kabbalistic schools developed in the aftermath of everything. One of those in Jerusalem, led by the Mizrahi Rabbi Rabbi, and another in Brody in Poland. And those two will become the central schools, so to speak, of Kabbalah in the period after this. Now, the Kabbalah also developed very highly technical Kabbalah in Baghdad, in Kurdistan, in Morocco, Marrakesh was a huge Kabbalistic center. So Kabbalah continued to develop in the aftermath of the Shabtai Tzvi business, especially in the Sephardic world, without really a hitch. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that the Sephardi world was much more stable than the Ashkenazi world at that time in terms of social stability and Jewish education. But again, I think I mentioned this several times ago that a lot of the people that were really seduced by the Shabbatian movement were people who had only recently really come back to Judaism. And so they don't really anchored in Judaism in a very profound way, in a way that, for instance, the communities in Marrakesh, the communities in Baghdad, they've been there for 1,000 years. Easily 1,000 years. And so when they looked at the whole Shabtai Tzvi thing, they were like, no. So because they had a much deeper education. So the Sephardi world was a bit less affected by the whole thing. And so it's not surprising that in Jerusalem, they never accepted the whole Shabbat business to begin with. They excommunicated him as soon as they could. That the one of the largest Kabbalistic schools in the aftermath of all of it will develop. As I mentioned last time, the two Kabbalistic schools take very different directions. The school of Beitel in Jerusalem is going to take the form of really intense concentration or Kabbalah during prayer. And that school, again, will last basically until 1969, when the last adherent of that school died, which is amazing. The school lasted for hundreds of years, although very tightly guarded, very disciple-student-oriented. And of course, the other is Poland, and that is going to be largely influenced by Lithuanian Kabbalah, and Polish and Lithuanian Kabbalah is going to be mostly remarked by intellectual Kabbalistic speculation. And so out of that world is going to flow a mountain of highly intellectualized Kabbalistic systems that are going to basically try to do the work of systematizing Lurianic Kabbalah, especially vis-a-vis the old Baron system, which I have to this period also saw, as I talked about, the rise. Hasidism is probably important. It's the most important movement in Judaism probably in the past 300 years. And Hasidism went on to spawn an entirely new system of Judaism, a new system of social relations, a new system of customs, a new system of dress. All kinds of things have come out of the Hasidic world. A whole new style of song. The Nigonim that I'm sure all of you are very familiar with come out of the Hasidic world. And so it's from that world where we have a focus on extreme piety, but also piety that's meant to find the divine every day. It's a piety in which God about you, but you can't see God. The divine is everywhere. I think of the line from the Quran, which I can easily imagine Hasidic Rabbi having the Quran. That image in the Quran has always struck me as incredibly evocative. And I can easily imagine someone like Ahmed Breslov having written something just like that. So divine is that close to you. The obstacle is just you. You and your ego are fundamentally you and your lusts and your desires. It's your desire to get rich or to have fame or to be loved by someone or whatever. It's these things that get in the way of your relationship with the divine, because the divine for the Hasidic movement is right there. You have to do the work of erasing the barriers between you and the divine, and it's in the erasure of the barriers that one can experience the divine in the everyday, including even in the movements of one's physical body, the sound of a bird. Some of the Rebbe's were able to understand the language of the birds. They would listen to birds sing, and they said they're singing, they're talking, they're having theological debates that the Rebbe's could understand. The Fegelschracht allowed them to hear the debates among the rabbis and the birds, which I always found beautiful, like sitting in the forest, listening to the birds rather than just hearing like the rest of us, normie people that all we hear is the birds. The Rebbe's, they don't hear birds, they hear debates about birds about God. And so I always found that to be Hasidism is not just theological debates among the animal. So again, according to the Hasidic idea, it's a deep desire to experience the divine in every aspect of life, and to cleave to God. The Vedic clinging to God and the way that you do this is something like cultivation with shamanic during the world. This is the Rebbe, sometimes they're tzaddikim, they're righteous people who have a unique relationship with God. They are intensely holy. And of course, these rabbis go on to set up their courts, and those courts really operate a bit like royalty. Still do operate a bit like royalty even to this day. And so you have a loyalty to the Rebbe, to your Rebbe, and the chesed encounters the divine primarily through the Rebbe, and it's in that Rebbe chesed relationship that chesed isn't really grows up sort of spirituality today. About how that's gotten a little stranger, especially with the Chabad movement, which I forgot to mention much in the later slide, so we can talk about that a little bit as well. But we'll see how that develops. As we stopped last time, the sort of cliffhanger from last time was that what I think that no one really realized in the aftermath of the whole Shabbatai Tzvi thing, that as much as the Shabbatai Tzvi business was a disaster, no one really saw what was happening in the background that was a bigger deal. The same year that Shabbatai Tzvi converted to Islam and apostatized was 1666, and I'm sure as many folks in the room know, 1666 is a dynamite year in the history of science. It's the year that Isaac Newton discovered or invented calculus. Of course, he discovered and invented sometimes Leibniz, and there's a bitter debate about that. It's also the same year that Newton discovered the fundamental nature of light, and also he basically figured out Newtonian physics as we know it now. And he published all that in 1666. This is called the Year of Miracles. So at the same time that Newton is figuring all that out, inventing calculus and all this stuff, that's the year Shabbatai Tzvi converts to Islam. So it's difficult. I know that for many people, and for me too, when I think about Shabbatai's conversion, I think of it as a medieval event. It's something that happened a long, long time ago. And I think of somehow Newton not having happened a long, long time ago. Newton feels very modern to me. It feels like I could just sort of, we could play chess with somebody on Star Trek. And they happen at the same time. They happen the exact same year. And so what's coming down the pike, and what I think the Jewish world did not see in the aftermath of this entire Shabbatai Tzvi business, was the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was happening all around the Jewish world, in France, in North America, in England, and in Holland and Germany. The Enlightenment was developing a huge, completely new worldview that was dynamically breaking from what had come before, with its emphasis on rationality, its emphasis on experimental science, its emphasis on extreme logic. And so we begin to get philosophers like Descartes, like Spinoza. Spinoza's philosophy rejects there's a God separate from nature. It's just nature, and nature is God, and God is nature. It's the same thing. We're getting to mechanistic philosophers. The philosophers believe that all of nature is like a giant machine. If you study it carefully, you can understand how it works. If you understand how it works, you can predict it, and therefore you can make it do things for you. This incredibly mechanistic philosophy is in many ways really wonderful, and many ways I think like that. Inside the Jewish world, they never saw this coming. It just sort of landed on their doorstep. When I say landed on their doorstep, what I really mean is Napoleon showed up. What Hegel called the world spirit on horseback. Napoleon shows up in Central Europe and even Eastern Europe. Remember, he marched all the way to Russia. So everywhere Napoleon went, recall, he brought with him these Enlightenment ideas. His army was a sort of Enlightenment army. Especially the armies are ever enlightened. And Napoleon brought with him the metric system. He brought with him French revolutionary ideas. He brought with him the idea that if you're a citizen of a country, then you should have equal protection under the law. There should never be second-class citizens. Either you're a citoyen or you're not. And if you are a citoyen, you have the rights and privileges of everyone else that is protected by the rational laws. Of course, I'm not saying Napoleon was perfect or anything like Hegel, at some level, he represented the very movement of Geist, the very movement of God, and the realization of Godness in the world. And of course, Hegel got disappointed with it later, but made a big impression on the young Hegel. And so this is at the same time that the Hasidic movement was taking off. And so when these two movements come into conflict with each other, come into contact with each other, there's going to be a break-off in the Jewish world where some Jews are going to become very attracted to Enlightenment values, and they're going to incorporate those Enlightenment values into the Jewish world. and that is called the Haskalah, the Enlightenment. And I think almost everyone here in this class, and almost probably everyone hearing my voice, all of us are pretty enticed at some level by Enlightenment ideas. The idea of equal protection under the law, you can't be just killed because of what you believe in, that we have a rational system of weights and measures, like we do in this country, but most countries in the world, that the scientific, the very fact that I'm talking to you through this machine is proof of the success of the Enlightenment. So for many Jews, the Enlightenment was a solution to so many problems in the Jewish world, both in terms of the inner backward of the Jewish world, when they superstitious world ruled by how they figure these things out, and they believed in werewolves, vampires, and they believed in all this stuff. Many Jews were very disenfranchised with that, and wanted to rush into the world of the Enlightenment, and they did. In fact, for the Jewish folks here, I imagine for many of the Jewish folks in this class, you are the children of the great-great-great-grandchildren of the masculine, of the Enlightenment folks. Because the Enlightenment was very, very successful, and for better and for worse. So what ends up happening is that this new kind of rational Judaism, integration of Enlightenment values with Judaism became, incredibly polarizing. We also, speaking again for the Jewish folks in the room, we live in an incredibly easy world compared to our ancestors, because in many ways we can adapt both worlds. We can be religious, and we can be distinct. There was no middle ground in the 18th century. Either you jump ship and you join the Enlightenment camp, or you stay behind the shuttle and you stay in the world of the pre-Enlightenment, the traditional world, I should say. And so in the traditional world, they realized how much of a threat this was. They were terrified of this. And they doubled down on the traditional aspects of the world. And so in many ways, both Enlightenment Judaism and Haredi Judaism, that is to say the black hat, ultra-Orthodox Judaism that we recognize now, are both actually creations of the Enlightenment. So I know that sometimes Haredi folks like to pretend as if they're the legitimate continuers and inheritors of a discrete, continuous line of Judaism reaching all the way back to Moses. If you ask them, Moses wore a black hat and spoke Yiddish. But I guarantee you he didn't. The reality of modern Judaism is at some level, all of it is a response to the Haskalah. It's all a response. Either you double down on tradition and you retreat it into the world of the dynastic world, of the Hasidic world, or the Lubavitch world, or you drifted off into the secular world and you tried to make it go at either becoming assimilated or you tried to balance out both. Assimilation was the largest, the earliest, biggest move. So what we have here basically is a choice between some level of assimilation, right? As much as those countries would allow you to assimilate, whether it's the French or the Germans, and as you know from the terrifying history of how this will go, it will fail. Assimilation ultimately was a failed strategy. It did not protect Jews in the end. And neither did God, by the way. It wasn't like the Haredi people were protected when the first Panthers rolled in. And so what we have is a dualistic, a polarized world by the 1700s, in which there are Haskalah Jews, and then there are traditional Jews. The world becomes polarized. It becomes increasingly polarized. Now, that's not to say that Kabbalah stops. If all the kinds of things that have not stopped the Kabbalah hadn't stopped them, whether it was the Crusades or the Tzvi event or whatever pogroms would have stopped the Kabbalah, well, this whole Enlightenment thing didn't stop it either. And so many of the traditional centers of Judaism in the medieval or in the early modern world, they continued to produce Kabbalah as if nothing was going on. For them, they may have not even known. And so, especially in the Hasidic world, there is a huge outpouring of literature. This is the time period where the folks in the Chabad movement, who I'm sure many folks have had contact with, they began very rigorously developing their movement. Also, it's worth pointing out that the Chabad movement becomes sort of the intellectual center, in many ways, of the Hasidic movement, they become much more interested in the world of the mind and the world of the intellect as opposed to just the world of the emotions. And so the Chabad movement actually becomes much more of a rigorous system of Hasidic philosophy as opposed to just songs and being happy or whatever. So this is a period of people like Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, which I imagine most folks have heard of. Nachman of Breslov is probably one of the most famous rabbis of this time period. He's of course known for his deep spiritual reflections and his existential torment that he experiences. He was a person of great highs and great lows. I guess most historical people who we end up remembering are kind of manic depressive in this way, and so Rabbi Nachman is known for this extreme joy, extreme sorrow he's capable of feeling. And ultimately he's going to give rise to the Hasidic movement, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also the Nanach movement, which I imagine if you've ever been to spend time in Israel, you will at some point encounter some Nanach guys, which tend to smell as pious as they are. They wear the knit cap from Nanach right on it. They listen to techno music and dance around. They're generally, I don't know what pious to a fault, something. So those guys are out there and they're a big deal in the neo-Hasidic world. Of course, also at this time period, probably one of the most important Jewish festivals. This is a rom call, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, probably the greatest traditional Jewish mind of the early modern period. And Luzzatto wrote a mountain of stuff. It's really, I was looking over some of it today and I was like, my God, this guy wrote 50 books. I've probably read one or two of them. He wrote 50 something books. It's an enormously huge output. But the Ramchal is known as a young man for having had a spiritual experience where he had a magi, or a spiritual teacher, begin to reveal him all kinds of spiritual things. He was relatively young when this happened, and you can imagine that in the aftermath of the Shabbatai Tzvi business, no one wanted to hear about anyone talking to the spirits anymore. And so he kind of got kicked out of Italy a little bit. He kind of got expelled from Italy, and this led him on a journey through Europe. And in his journey through Europe, he ended up writing, like I said, a ton of stuff. His two most famous books are Derech Hashem, The Way of the Lord. Derech Hashem is probably the most systematic collection or systematization of Judaism that incorporates both philosophical issues and Kabbalah into one system. Derech Hashem is a really, really great book. It's in Hebrew and English if you want to study it. It's a fantastic text that really does the work of combining the sort of philosophy of the day. Although the philosophy of that is a little outdated, but it's still a very amazing book. His other major book is a book on ethics, Masila Yashari, which is also really, really great to read and also read in English too. And both of these books have gone on to become basically classics in the Orthodox world. There's even study sessions, and they study these books over and over and over again all through the year. So Derech Hashem and Masila Yasharim are classics of Judaism. They become classics of Judaism, and again, they incorporate Kabbalistic and non-Kabbalistic philosophical elements into one text. Again, Chaim Luzzatto is probably say he's the most important rabbi of this period. He's probably the most important rabbi of this period. And so, very, very important to that. Also, over in Eastern Europe, they're also continuing to do classical Kabbalah. A lot of what's happening at this point in the Kabbalistic texts is a lot of systematization texts, which are trying again to systematize the learning system. But also there are a lot of encyclopedic texts where they're just going through and trying to list things, describe what things are. One of the problems that comes along with more technical Kabbalah is that the Hebrew language just isn't actually that good at doing philosophy. There are a lot of technical reasons why this is. German is a far better language for doing philosophy, even than English. And Hebrew is a sort of clumsy language when it comes to doing philosophy. And it's also a bit of a clumsy language when it comes to doing Kabbalah, ironically enough. And so a lot of the technical terms in Kabbalah are very, very confusing. And a lot of what happens during this time period is the encyclopedizing of Kabbalah. And one of the more famous encyclopedias that gets written at this time is one of the books I would love to see translated. I have it downstairs, but I can read it. They have translating it. It's beyond me. But it's the Sefer Karnaim. Sefer Karnaim is an encyclopedia of the klipot. The klipot, as you may remember, are the shards left over in the process of creating the world, and those shards that are left over are actually demonic. Those are demons that sort of haunt the Lurianic world, and it's an encyclopedia of all the demons. And so we actually get a systematic account of the evil detritus left over from the creation of the world here in the 18th, 19th centuries in the Sefer Kanai, which is a fabulously interesting text. You can read it online for free. Of course, you have to read it in Hebrew, there's no translation. Now, as you probably also know, in all of this, through the 19th century, the amount of anti-Semitism in Europe doesn't go away. Anti-Semitism has always been there in Europe. There's always been European anti-Semitism. Well, the anti-Semitism gets a new added dimension. As you might imagine, as Jews become more and more part of secular civil society, there's also anti-Semitism that emerges at the level of discrimination of Jews in secular civil society. Of course, the most famous and infamous example of this is the Dreyfus Affair in the 19th century in France. And so, with this uptick in anti-Semitism and the ongoing reality of anti-Semitism, there's sort of three distinct ideas basically about what to do about it. One idea is the traditional idea: double down on being pious and God will protect you. It's going to go in theory for many thousands of years, but that theory no one's given up on yet. So one is double down on being pious and God will protect you. The other theory is that at some level, you just need to get out of Europe. Europe is just a death trap. We've been living in Europe now for 1,000 years, and for 1,000 years, it's just been like it's just been pogrom after crusade, after blood libel, after witch hunt, after whatever. It's just that the Europeans are never going to accept us, and at some level, eventually they're going to try to kill us all. It's just a matter of time. It turns out they were right. So what do? You leave. You leave Europe. You pack your bags and you leave Europe. And in the mid-19th century, that idea takes the form of secular Zionism. This is where Haskalah Jews, enlightened Jews, decide as a group that the situation in Europe is basically untenable and we need to leave. And this is the emergence, of course, of very, very nascent Zionism. Now, it's two things that are worth noting here about really early Zionism is that it was entirely a secular movement at first. In fact, it didn't really get to have much religious backing until the mid-20th century, frankly. And so Zionism was a secular, largely socialist movement, although not all of it was socialist, not all of it was socialist in the way we recognize it now. And that movement, while it did accept some messianic themes, and it was sort of apocalyptic in its narrative and the way it talked about the world, it wasn't really informed by Kabbalah. But I think that it was informed. If you read a lot of the language of the early Zionists, you will see a lot of the exile redemption language. You will see a lot of language that is coming in from the Kabbalah, although I think it's mostly through social osmosis, right? So, let me make that more clear, put a finer point on it. The Zionist movement early on was never influenced by Kabbalah directly. Although, I think that there is some messianic and some Kabbalistic ideas that have reached into Zionism, mostly because of sort of social osmosis, because of Jews, and they've been raised on a diet of Kabbalah and Torah. So that's one part of it. The other part of it with the Zionist movement is that, from a religious perspective, it was completely remote. It was completely in Avera. The religious world rejected Zionism very early on. And when I say the religious world rejected Zionism, most of the religious world still rejects Zionism. It still says Zionism is a toxic ideology that is harmful to Palestinians, and it is irreligious. It's blasphemous. It's straight up heresy. And so this early, and even I said even the Reform movement very early on, even the Reform movement in Germany, at the very beginning of the Reform movement, they rejected Zionism in two major conferences. So even at the very far progressive end of the Jewish world, Zionism was very unpopular, at least to start. And it remains unpopular now, at least in the Haredi world. If folks have been watching the very wonderful show Shtisel, the soap opera, basically, you'll know in Shtisel, right, every time that they bring the Zionist up, Shulam's brother always says, he refers to the Zionism, he refers to Zionism as Shulam, the evil people. He always calls it Shulam, the evil people. And so this is a thing that developed early on in the response to Zionism. So it never became religious until much later. In fact, I would say that in many ways it wasn't until Ralph Cook, who we'll talk about in a minute, and it certainly wasn't until I think after the 88 war that in a big way you get religious Zionism. I think it's a relatively minority. The Kabbalah, of course, continues to develop, right? It's not like the Kabbalah stops. Slide. Oh yes, this is a mistaken slide, but there's an extra thing down here I want to talk about. I must have mucked this slide up. But anyway, the last thing I wanted to talk about here is that in the 19th century, what also happens in the non-Jewish world is there's sometimes what is referred to as the occult revival. The occult revival was a re-interest in occult sciences, alchemy, sort of a romantic interest in this stuff. And what you get are people like Ebenezer Sibley and Barrett, who are people who published the Magus. You have a bunch of people really interested in the occult again, and this sort of occult revival that occurred primarily in the 19th century also incorporated some older elements of Christian Kabbalah. And they ultimately develop a new form of Kabbalah out of Christian Kabbalah that gets referred to as the Hermetic Kabbalah. And this is a completely non-Jewish, occult-centered version of the Kabbalah, primarily used for engaging in ceremonial magic. So we have elements of Freemasonry being combined with elements of Renaissance magic, and then that being fused together with some elements of Kabbalah. And that develops what we now refer to as the Hermetic Kabbalah, which is another third branch of Kabbalah that is developed. There's, of course, Jewish Kabbalah with a K, there is Christian Kabbalah with a C, and now this develops eventually in the early 19th century, 20th century into Hermetic Kabbalah with a Q. And these forms of Kabbalah continue into occult practice all the way to this day. So again, in the 19th century, Kabbalah undergoes another mutation, although not a Jewish mutation. We look primarily in the non-Jewish world, primarily in England, where this occult revival takes place. So the Hermetic Kabbalah is out there and it proves very popular. There's a whole big world of people who spirituality is wrapped up with the very sophisticated, very complicated system of hypothesis. We refer to as. So as I mentioned, right, just a minute ago, one of the other strategies, right, so we have one strategy double down traditional, the other strategy is leave, go to Palestine or wherever. The other strategy that I mentioned a minute ago too is assimilation. Assimilation was a very daring strategy, and perhaps I think one of the more difficult, and I think that many of the people who did the job of assimilating, I think, get written off as traitors or something. I think it's really unfortunate when we talk about that generation of folks. But assimilation was a really difficult task of trying to maintain two things at once. It was trying to maintain being Jewish and also trying to maintain your identity in a world that rejected you. Trying to be German and be Jewish, whatever German Jew meant. And the problem was that the Orthodox world hated Jew because they thought that he was a sellout, and the Germans never really accepted Jew either. And you could do anything, almost, right? I think of people like Husserl. Husserl was the great German philosopher whose son fought in World War I and still got fired when the Nazis took over. They never could become Jewish enough. In fact, even for the anti-Semites, for the Nazis, the more that the Jews assimilated, the more dangerous they were. They were almost hiding among you. And so there was something about this that the strategy of assimilation was always going to be at some level of the game. But what ends up happening, at least in the academic world, is that, or at least in the religious world, rather, I should say, is that Judaism early on had to basically come to look like Lutheranism. They had to make a Judaism that looked as much like the Lutheranism of the 19th and 20th century as possible. And that movement became the Reform movement, right? Ethical monotheism. And if you look at the Lutheran movement and the early Reform movement, it is amazing how similar they are. Even the choir, it's just like the organs, right? If you've ever been to a classical Reform synagogue, the organs and the choir, and they even moved Shabbat to Sunday mornings and all kinds of stuff. They were desperately trying to fit in. And again, at one level, one way of looking at it is they're trying to sell out. But again, I think the more that you accuse them of that, you walk a mile in their shoes and understand how devastating the reality of anti-Semitism was at that time and how awful it would get. And at the same time, I admire them. I admire the courage it takes to try to figure out a way of being German and Jewish, being French and Jewish in a world that you basically rejected by both sides, no matter what you do. I think it's very heroic and a very difficult path to march. On the academic front, part of what had to happen to justify the viability of Judaism is to justify it to the world of the theologians. And that's the theologians largely of Lutheran theology in the mid and late 19th century, which, as you probably imagine, as you may know even, German scholarship at this time was some of the most amazing scholarship in the world when it comes to the Bible. This is a time period where critical source theory was being developed. This is a time where the Bible is being systematically studied, scientifically studied for the first time. This is where Hebrew is really getting into the manuscripts of these things. It's really a time period of enormous erudition. In fact, I would say the German biblical scholarship of 10 years probably produced more erudite scholarship than has been produced 30 years of what we do. It's amazing. These guys, they just knew 15 languages. They just did. That's just how they worked. They didn't have the whole Bible. They just had chunks of the Hebrew Bible memorized. So the scholarship was very driven by Lutheran, pietist, very careful scholarship. And so what's emerging at the same time is the attitude to do the same thing in Judaism. And the attitude to do the same thing in Judaism was largely spearheaded by a group of Jewish Haskalah scholars. This movement became known as the Wissenschaftliches movement. And Raza, I'm going to beg your forgiveness if I mispronounce German stuff as I go. So the Wissenschaftliches movement, scientific study of Jewish books, was a movement in the academic Jewish world to study Jewish literature using all the modern tools of that time of German scholarship to study religious literature. And they had to make a decision about what they studied, because what they studied and what they published basically represented Judaism to the outside academic world. So, what did they study? What did they publish? Well, Talmud. They focused their energy on the Talmud. Why? Because the Talmud, for one, is a highly systematic, highly argumentative book based in logic. They could argue that Judaism is rational because the Talmud is rational. The Talmud is a book of arguments driven by logic, and therefore Judaism is logical. Right? So we have the ethical components of the Hebrew Bible, and we have the logical components of the Talmud, and therefore Judaism is respectable because it's a paragon of logic. Well, guess what isn't terribly logical? Kabbalah. So, what did the Wissenschaftliches movement do? Ignored it. Basically pretended that it wasn't there. Why? Because it was embarrassing. It was superstition. It was occultism. It was nonsense, made up, fraudulent stuff. For them, for the Wissenschaftliches movement, Kabbalah was an embarrassment and put back in the darkness of the Middle East because it made Jews look crazy. If you've been listening to some of the stuff I've been saying over the past 14 weeks and thinking to yourself, God, that sounds nuts. Well, it does sound nuts. And can you imagine a bunch of Jewish scholars presenting that to a bunch of erudite Lutheran scholars, being like, yes, Judaism. We believe that God masturbated reality to existence. What? That's not going to fly, right? It's going to make them hate you. It's going to reinforce every negative stereotype about the Jews. The Jews are irrational. They're driven by superstition. They believe in nonsense. The Wissenschaftliches movement had to make a decision, and the decision was not Kabbalah, Talmud. And so early on, Kabbalistic literature was largely put on the back burner, to put it politely. And as you might know, at the same time this is happening, this is also the same time that all of the movements in Judaism are beginning to form. The Reform movement, the Conservative movement, the Masorti movement, the Reconstructionist movement begins in the early 20th century. All of the movements, even modern Orthodox Judaism, all of the movements and movement Judaism in the non-traditional Jewish world, all of them look at some level to the Wissenschaftliches movement, and they base their Judaism at some level on the Judaism being pumped out by places like JTS, by places like German Scholarship, by places like Cincinnati, the Reform Seminary. And guess what? None of those places are doing. None of them are doing Kabbalah. Why? Because it's embarrassing. They do not want to look like crazy people. So the Kabbalah is totally sidelined for 2.5, 3 generations by scholars. Completely sidelined. And it's sidelined at a decisive moment in Jewish history. What is that decisive moment? The emergence of the movements. So if you grew up in a movement, the Reform movement, Conservative movement, if you grew up in any of the movements, their scholars were simply not being trained on Kabbalah. And because they weren't being trained on it, they couldn't teach it. And because they didn't teach it, it was abandoned. This is the reason why, for folks who grew up, especially for folks who are a bit older than me, if you grew up in the movement Judaism world, you never heard about Kabbalah. There's a reason why. Because the rabbis you had never learned about it. And that's because the generation before them never learned about it. The generation before them made a decision not to learn about it. And that's what happened. Effectively, Kabbalah becomes decanonized by the modern Jewish movement. Modern Judaism basically decanonized it. So the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, all the literature we've talked about basically goes back on the shelf. And what comes back is Talmud, if you're lucky, but mostly Tanakh. That's the reason why you will never really see in the movements until recently studies of Kabbalah, studies of Talmud, even Talmud. I mean, for folks here who grew up in the movement world, how often did you all study Talmud? How often was Talmud something that you would be encouraged to study or heard about much? I see heads shaking. No, yeah, even Talmud, right? Even Talmud was sidelined. And you can imagine, Talmud sidelined, then surely Zohar will be sidelined. So that's one part of the story. A huge part of the story is that Kabbalah didn't go away. They still did Kabbalah, studied Kabbalah in the traditional world. It's in the progressive world that it was abandoned. It was decanonized in our world. And it's only now limping back into canonization. And I think it needs to be recanonized more quickly than that. Of course, the other thing that happens in this time is in the mid-20th century, and there's no way to avoid the elephant in the room. It's of course the Holocaust. The Holocaust devastated, obviously, European Jewry, but in terms of Kabbalah, it really devastated the Hasidic world. And the reason why it devastated the Hasidic world, as you might imagine, is the Hasidic Jews live basically in these very tight-knit social networks. They are distinctively dressed. They look very Jewish. They pay us. They dress like Jews. Targeting them was the easiest thing in the world. They all live in the same shtetls and ghettos. So liquidating them and killing them, putting them on these cattle cars was very, very easy for the Nazis. So the Hasidic world was incredibly destroyed in the Holocaust. I think proportionately, and Roz would be obviously the better expert at this than I would be, that the Hasidic world suffered apocalyptic levels of devastation in the Holocaust, just because they were basically sitting ducks, and also their theology prevented them from leaving. So many of them, because they rejected Zionism, did not try to flee to Palestine. They thought it was religiously repugnant to flee to Palestine because they were also tied to the Rebbe. They also didn't want to individually leave, right? They were tied to this person, and so if the Rebbe didn't leave, they didn't leave. And lastly, right, we looked the parts. When the Einsatz group moves in, they're there. They're living in that. They're living in that shtetl, and they're there with that Rebbe. And it doesn't take but an afternoon of a really blackout drunk group of Einsatz group to do the deed to basically eliminate an entire Hasidic dynasty. And Chas v'shalom, that happened. It happened over and over and over again in Eastern Europe. Especially Hungary was especially badly hit. I think 1 in 4 Satmar were killed or something like that in the Holocaust. It's just a devastating apocalyptic story. And as you know, the only people keeping the light on at this time, in many ways, for Kabbalah are the Hasidic people. It's the people in Eastern Europe. It's the traditional people. They're the ones keeping the lights on. And with their execution by the beasts that were the Nazis, the light goes out. The light went out. It's a devastating blow to Kabbalah. Now, luckily, our Sephardic brothers and sisters, Sephardic folks, they were still doing Kabbalah in Morocco. They were still doing Kabbalah over in Baghdad. Still doing Kabbalah in Northern Africa. So it wasn't like that the devastating blow that was dealt to European Jews at the end of Kabbalah. But it is just important to say that the Hasidic movement and European Jewry was a very important center of the development in Kabbalah, and the Holocaust uniquely and profoundly destroyed some elements of that continuity. Luckily, they did survive. Many of them survived, and they would regroup. Some of them in America. And in fact, the two largest groups, Samar would eventually, so like the Samar Rebbe Teitelbaum eventually made his way out either before the war or in the middle of the war, and the Lubavitch Rebbe also made it out as well, and they refounded their Hasidic dynasties in Brooklyn, Holy Land, real Holy Land, which is Brooklyn. So Borough Park and Crown Heights, respectively. Go visit the Holy Land. It's just right over there in Brooklyn. You folks have this right in Israel, just a borough of Brooklyn. So the real Holy Land is over there, just around Coney Island. So the rebound, folks, the rebound. How did this all rebound? We have the Holocaust, we have the Haskalah, we have the Wissenschaftliches Judentum movement. How did this rebound? Well, it rebounded in a couple different ways. The rebound in many ways began with a young maverick philologist. People forget that Gerhard Scholem, also people forget that he was Gerhard Scholem. He got Gershomized later when he made Aliyah, but Gerhard Scholem was a young maverick philologist who studied language. That's the reason why his scholarship is so top-notch. He could read everything in the original language. And Scholem made the crazy argument that Kabbalah deserved to be academically studied. It's part of Jewish history. And so in the 1920s, Gerhard would do all the heavy lifting of reading basically every single Kabbalistic book he could get his hands on in the archives. Every single one. And being the good German scholar that he was, he did that. And unlike the Wissenschaftliches Judentum movement that rejected the importance of Kabbalah, Gerhard Scholem argued convincingly that there simply was no Judaism without Kabbalah. You couldn't imagine Judaism without it. Judaism was just as important, or Kabbalah was just as important in history as Talmud as anything else. So Scholem argued over the time that Kabbalah had to be reintegrated both academically and historically into history and thinking about what Judaism was. And this was by no means easy, folks. When Scholem, who was already an established scholar at the time, was invited to speak at JTS, give a lecture at JTS, at the Jewish Theological Seminary there in New York, when he was allowed to speak, the justification for him being able to speak was that, well, look, the Kabbalah is nonsense, right? Kabbalah is Narishkeit. Kabbalah is nonsense, but, right, Narishkeit is Narishkeit. Aber die Geschichte des Narishkeit, das ist Wissenschaft, right? Nonsense is nonsense, but the history of nonsense is science. So Kabbalah is nonsense, but the history of Kabbalah is science. It's worth studying as historical information, but God forbid anyone Kabbalah is. By the way, was coming from the most famous the most famous progressive Talmud scholar in 20th century history. Probably the most important Talmud, one of the most important Talmud scholars of the early 20th century, the Talmud professor at JTS. Basically invented modern sort of some quasi-secular Talmud education. That's how Scholem was introduced. Can you imagine being introduced at the JTS by basically saying, yeah, what you study is nonsense. But because you study it as history, as something we used to do, it's legitimate. But God forbid anyone actually be a Kabbalist. That's completely crazy. So Scholem really had to walk an uphill battle. He fought an uphill battle the entire time to get legitimacy for what he was doing, which is unimaginable now, considering that Kabbalah is so legitimate, so mainstream. But Scholem had to fight that battle in many ways on his own. Luckily, he was a very capable scholar, and he was able to do it. Scholem brought with him an army of students. He attracted a great deal of students, folks like Moshe Yedel and Joseph Don, other folks who've gone on to become themselves leading scholars in the world of Kabbalah. His students were also perfectly willing to criticize him, and they did. They made careers criticizing him. Folks like Moshe Yedel It really showed how important Sholem was, and also how incomplete Sholem was. And we have a whole new generations of scholars who believed Zahi Weiss and all kinds of stuff. Bernie Moroz is a huge group of scholars that blow my mind with every book that they write. And so the academic study of Kabbalah is landed. It is now totally legit if you want to study Kabbalah in college. You can take an academic level Kabbalah class and no one's going to bat an eye. Sure, part of Jewish history. At the same time, there is an emerging, relatively small group of religious Zionism, led by, of course, by Rav Kook, and he would eventually give rise to religious Zionism as we know it. Although Rav Kook wasn't terribly influenced by, wasn't a huge Kabbalist, but certainly a lot of the blue-reading themes of exile and redemption will play a part in the rise of Zionism. The most important, I think, Kabbalist to come really in the early to mid 20th century would be Rabbi Yehuda Ashlag, Baal HaSulam, the master of the ladder. And the Baal HaSulam would make Aliyah in Israel, and he would compose two incredibly influential works. The most important, I think, is his commentary on the Zohar, a text that he took, I think, 10 years to write, called Hasulam, the ladder. And this is a both introduction to the Zohar, but also a commentary on the Zohar. And he translated Zohar out of the crazy Aramaic that it's in into a very modern Hebrew to make it accessible to a whole generation of people who otherwise would not be able to read it in the original Aramaic. He published it in basically modern Hebrew, modern Lashon Kodesh Hebrew, much more accessible in modern Hebrew. So many people who read Zohar now in the Orthodox world, and also many people who study Isaac Luria, are going to study many of the ideas in some level through the lens of Rabbi Ashlag, who also develops like interesting comic theory. There's, in fact, I think a kibbutz that's based on some of his ideals in northern Israel, Calvinism. So Yehuda Ashlag becomes very important. I think probably the most important character in all this. Another character that I don't mention in this that I can't believe I left out, of course, is Rabbi Menachem Schneerson. And what's important to know about him is that he was important founders of the Kiruv movement, that's to say, the outreach of the Jews and God House, that's because one basically, at least most of it. And Menachem Mendel Schneerson founded this enormous Kiruv network of the Chabad movement, and he was just a hugely important figure in the history of 20th century Judaism. It's really hard to downplay all the really important things that he did. But one of the things that's worth mentioning here that's important, that will be important going into 20 is that when he died, it was already believed in his lifetime that he was the Messiah, and then when he died, people really began to believe he was the Messiah. So there is a movement in the Chabad world. It's not a super big movement. I don't think it's as big as it was in the late 90s. It seems to be mostly localized to Brooklyn and Israel, especially in Kfar Chabad, where they believe he's the Messiah. Also, I have a so I have, so at any rate, the Menachem Mendel Schneerson was believed to be the Messiah, and I studied briefly at a Chabad yeshiva, and I definitely met people who believed that he was not only not dead, but that he had been taken into heaven somehow bodily, and that he was going to return really soon, and that it really his return would be heralded by Jews adopting more Torah, and that basically he was kind of occluded, and his occultation would come to an end, and the Rebbe would reappear as the King Messiah. Of course, you can still go to Crown Heights, you can still go to Brooklyn, and you can still see crowns, images of the Rebbe's flag, which has a yellow with a crown, and it says Mashiach, not Messiah. So there's this huge messianic movement, which again could be a whole class unto itself inside of the Chabad movement, where they do believe that their late leader is the Messiah. And this is causing some serious problems in the Chabad movement because it is such a movement based on outreach. Although in my experience and what I've been told by folks who have grown up in the movement is that largely the kind of people that the messianic stuff appeals to are typically people like Bolsheviks who convert back to Orthodox Judaism and younger people, but most of the more established Chabad world doesn't really get down with this Messiah stuff. Although I think they do still control 77, which is the main synagogue in the Chabad world there in Brooklyn, Eastern Parkway. So the Chabad movement has this messianic thing going on, which is super weird and interesting. For the folks who are in Michigan who are hanging out with me in this class, you probably have never heard about this or heard about it only briefly because the Shemto family, which is the larger Chabad family here in Michigan, is a very old Chabad family. They were sent here as emissaries by the Rebbe way back in the 70s or 80s, something like that. But they were the lead force in many ways of the anti-Messianist movement. They really thought the Messianist movement was dangerous. And the Shemto family is very powerful here, at least in Michigan. Never been on the Messianic camp. I don't think Messianic has ever gotten a foothold in the Metro Detroit area when it comes to that stuff. That's different in other places, but I don't think that the Messianic camp has ever gotten a foothold. But go to Brooklyn, go to 770, certainly is there. All right, the last two things I guess I'll mention before we really wrap up is the rise of the Neo-Hasidic movement. As folks know, the Neo-Hasidic movement was pioneered by folks like Martin Buber, who came out of the Hasidic world but maintained a lot of, knowledge is not the right word, but wanted to sort of modernize and expand the Hasidic movement outside of the dynastic structure. And so many of the tales of the Hasidim and a lot of Hasidic spirituality became sort of exported out of the Hasidic world and then imported into the modern Orthodox world and the conservative world especially, and the Reconstructionist world most recently in the sort of the Kabbalah movement of the 1970s. This is a period of Karlbach and stuff like that for folks who grew up with Karlbach at the time. And so it's in that world that we have the rise of what might be called what is called the Neo-Hasidic movement. And this movement is proven to be extraordinarily in the Jewish world. And they're great luminaries in the Neo-Hasidic a lot of teachers actually in is roots together and talk about Kabbalah briefly. I feel like a great honor to be able to hang out with one of the Gaon of the Neo-Hasidic movement. And so I got to spend some time with Art Green when I was up in Boston with Alana. So the Neo-Hasidic movement is alive and well, and I think it's popular together. It's actually growing in popularity. And with folks like Joey Weisenberg and other kinds of folks who are really channeling sort of Hasidic ideas into music, that stuff is going to really continue to be popular. The last thing I'll mention, is this is the thing I imagine some folks already know, is of course mainstream pop culture Kabbalah. The Kabbalah Center led by Rabbi Berg, which has received a lot of criticism, but whatever, I think that it's a legit form of Kabbalah as much as anything else is. From an academic perspective, the Kabbalah Center sort of and they teach specific kinds of Kabbalah that is tailored toward celebrities, basically. Now there are non-celebrities that get into this form of sort of kind of traditional Kabbalah. But this is made famous by Madonna, and I think Britney Spears was into it for a while, which I think even Britney Spears has a Hebrew tattoo on the back of her neck. Some kind of Kabbalistic tattoo. I don't know. Whatever sense Kabbalistic tattoos make. But, you go, Britney. I think she's from Mississippi, so I think we're home state people. So me and Britney go back. So people like Britney Spears and Madonna have also embraced Kabbalah in a pretty profound way. And apparently, I think even Madonna quit doing concerts on Friday night because of her commitment to certain kinds of Kabbalistic beliefs. But, I think that the material girl's from here, right? She's from Bay City. Madonna's from Bay City. The material grows from here. You have Rabbi Madonna, who has gone on to become influenced very heavily by Kabbalah at some level in her spirituality, although I don't think she's ever converted to Judaism. And there are many other people who've been influenced by the Kabbalah sector. Now, the Kabbalah sector is very polarizing. It's very controversial. And they've got some trouble with money stuff. Unsurprisingly, a religious organization gets involved with celebrities and get in trouble for money stuff. Could you believe that? Could you believe that? So the Kabbalah, in many ways, in the 1990s and 2000s, really went pop culture, with a lot of pop culture folks, musicians, and other folks becoming really influenced by Kabbalistic ideas, and those ideas becoming very mainstream, right? Very mainstream. Folks, Kabbalah Chai is going to live. Kabbalah is going to survive us all. It's back. The Kabbalah had gone through a couple thousand years, 1,000 years now of turns and twists and messiahs, dead messiahs, apostate messiahs, a mountain of books and commentaries. It's really gone through, I think, almost every kind of travail a religion can go through, a philosophy can go through. No philosophy that I can think of has gone through this much. Platonism or communism or whatever. Kabbalah has gone through so much, and it's had to transform and adapt itself. And when I think about the Kabbalah, is that I'm very happy and very glad to be alive now, because we're now living in some level, the golden age of Kabbalistic literature. More Kabbalistic literature is available to me than anyone else in history when it comes to accessible information. More Kabbalistic teachers are available. Secular Kabbalistic education is available. In a class like this is a completely secular academic class on Kabbalah. Also, you can go to dozens of teachers of Kabbalah to become a Kabbalist. And Kabbalah is accessible to people who never accessible before. Women, LGBTQ folks. It's accessible in a way that it never was before. And so I say that Kabbalah Chai, Kabbalah lives, and Kabbalah will live, because we are living in an age where the Kabbalah has finally been able to, at some level, withhold its secrets. You have to work hard to become a Kabbalist. You need to learn Hebrew, learn Aramaic, you might have to move to Israel, you have to move to Brooklyn. You have to do a lot of heavy lifting if you really want to get into Kabbalah. But you can. It's there. So much of it's on the internet. Right? So much of it you can get in your library alone. You can go buy books right there on Amazon and learn secrets of the Kabbalah that would have been utterly inaccessible to 99% of the Jewish population most of history. And right there they are, immediately available. Even English translations of things like the Zohar, or the Pritzker edition of the Zohar, massive 12-volume Pritzker edition. There was no standard English translation of the Zohar prior to that, not really. And now, for the first time in history, we have access to all 12 volumes of the Zohar, and new things are coming out every day. So we're living in a golden age for the study of Kabbalah, and we're living in a golden age for those who want to be Kabbalists. And I have to say that I'm really happy, and I feel really blessed, and I feel really grateful that all of you have decided to come along with me on this 14-week journey through the history of Kabbalah, because I feel very lucky that I have the privilege and the honor to be able to learn about Kabbalah and share what little I know, and to know that there are people interested in learning about Kabbalah and learning what little I know. And so I just want to thank all of you who hung out with me over the course of the past 14 weeks to learn some Kabbalah together, and to learn about Kabbalah and learn that this tradition is beautiful and strange and science fiction-y, just all over the place, weird and wonderful. And so I just want to express my deep gratitude for everyone who's dropped in for a class or stayed for all 14 or whatever. I'm just really grateful and really blessed and feel really thankful for everyone who's had the time, who's taken the time to learn some Kabbalah with me, and give me the opportunity to learn more about Kabbalah in the preparation of this class. So that's it. Thank you. It's really an honor and a privilege to be able to have done this class. And I look forward to learning with all of you soon, whether you're Kabbalah or not. I'd love to do a Zohar class. It's like my secret desire to do is to develop a big Zohar class. Both study Zohar and also study about the Zohar. Where we have Now imagine kind of a class that would be structured like a science class, where you have a lecture and a lab. The lecture would be like this, and then we have a lab. And the lab would be like studying the Zohar, studying it. So I imagine that's my dream gig. It's a lecture lab class, a Zohar lab, which I have to say, it's a little more exciting to me than working in a chemistry lab. So Zohar lab. So anyway, folks, that's up to the community, up to y'all. At some point, but I guess again, I'll just end with saying thank you, and I'm so happy that folks will come along with me on this journey. And it doesn't end here. I will definitely say that. Like I said, we're not ending with the end of Kabbalah. We're ending with ... because Kabbalah is going to outlive us all. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me as I explore the garden that is Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah. Again, if you'd like to support my work, we provide you accessible, free, and scholarly content topics like Kabbalah, alchemy, and the occult, magic, hermetic philosophy. Consider supporting my work on Patreon, or perhaps with a one-time donation. You can find those links below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.
Well, look who the fuck it is. How you living, pimp?
Yo.
I see yellow. Are you just jerking yourself off raw in a public park? Because that's usually frowned upon.
You're talking, I can't hear you.
Dog, this is bullshit. I don't know why you're inviting me into your life if you can't hear me.
No audio.
Yo.
One moment. All right, we're gonna do charades.
Oh, well, maybe it's my phone. Yo.
Yo, what's up?
How you living, pimp?
I'm living good.
What's good, son? Did you sleep today?
Yeah, I did.
I said, did you sleep today?
Yeah, did you not hear what I just said?
No, I didn't. Go ahead. What'd you say?
Oh. I went to sleep at like 8 a.m. and then got up at like when my dog woke me up. But
are you jerking yourself? Go ahead.
Talking to these two guys yesterday that I met on Fun, and they're like shitcoin, professional shitcoin traders. I told me that they'd show me the ropes a little bit, so I have like a little bit of money a tiny little amount of money to mess around with shitcoin. Got run like 5 times in a row on Pump Fun, but we'll see if they are gonna teach me.
One of the best investors in the game. They're from South Australia. They just so happen to additionally be a comedy finalist in the Raw comedy contest. They advise Dog with Hat, and they advise putting about $1 million in liquid assets into it, just Just putting that out there as a little alpha for your journey.
I feel like Zuda's like giving up on crypto a little bit.
Like he used to talk about it nonstop. You remember he used to come in and be like, "I'm a millionaire," and we'd be like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" He'd be like, "I'm a millionaire," and we're like, "Okay, then go get a car, go move into a house." He's like, "Oh, I'm not a millionaire like that." And be like, "Okay, well, what do you mean?" And he's like, you know, my investments just hit $1 million. And then literally I didn't talk to him for like 90 days. And he came back and he's like, "I blew it all." I'm like, "How did you blow $1 million?" He's like, "It went from $1 million to $40,000. And now he is living off the Australian government, making up uh, diagnoses that he may or may not have."
He told me that he just shorted gold with like a $50,000 like leverage trade on gold, which I was like, okay, it's at all-time highs, but I think back on it, like it kept going up. I studied set a stopwatch or something. He was up. But I whenever when he was talking about that crypto, like in like the back of my mind, you're gonna take a round trip. But like people think like literal like shit coins have value and markets don't fluctuate, but they definitely do.
Most certainly.
Game musical chairs.
Absolutely. I have a question for you. Are you interested in joining my Monday evening ballet club?
That's the strangest romantic inquiry anyone's ever posed to me. So definitely not.
There's nothing romantic about it.
Are you sure it's just a ballet club?
Actually, it's a fantasy football. Actually, it's a fantasy football league that is posing as a ballet club. But yeah, watch
That
yourself.
guy was weird.
That was weird. I wish they did an interview with him. They did some. They had like little videos of him, but
we want to hear his side.
I want to hear his side. Exactly. I want him to be like, "Doug, these guys wanted it. Let me just put it to you this way. I had this group of people. We were meeting for ballet. What does that tell you? Any dude who's going to this thing there's like a 50% chance. I'm not going to make it any higher or lower, but there's a good chance that this guy wants a dick in his ass." But there's also there's also 50% chance. No, I don't know if they're responsible because like they got brainwashed or whatever. But there's also like a 50% chance that they didn't. So I get that. But I want to hear his side of the story. I want him to be like anything. I know nothing about anything of the matter, dude. There's this it's not really the same, but it just reminds me of there's the Chappelle show, which you haven't watched, which is just really like just disappointing in life, but you know that's fine. And
I like Dave Chappelle. I have nothing against him. I'd love to see Dave Chappelle do skits.
Doug, then what? Then let's watch.
I've seen a few clips of it online.
Dog, it's not the same. You got to watch it. You got to make it part of your religion. It is amazing. I'm telling you, and this is absolutely true. Before the internet had memes, people just yelled Chappelle's show quotes to each other, like out the window. Like you would see somebody and you'd be like, "I'm rich, bitch," or you'd be like, I'm Rick James, bitch. Like people would just yell this stuff at each other and just it was before memes. Anyway, there's this episode that he does. It's called Black Bush. It's where he's George W. Bush and they're asking him about the invasion of Iraq.
I'm going in the elevator.
Okay. Thank you for warning me.
Yeah.
No one can hear you. No, I can't hear you. I can't hear you. So just, I'll wait. Let me know when you're on the other side, baby. Yo, does everybody remember when Riser was in the elevator? I do.
Wait 30 seconds.
I'm waiting 30 seconds for this pimp.
shaft.
He's in the shaft. He's getting the shaft. Shaft. Damn right. Who's that?
Getting shafted.
Shaft. Damn right.
Alright. Yeah, George W.
Yeah, so they asked George W. Bush about the invasion of Iraq, and they're like, "Does this have anything to do with oil?" And and Black Bush, Dave Chappelle's like, "Oil? What? Oil? Are you cooking, bitch?" And then he just like shoves everything off the table and runs away. Basically, that reminds me of how this, whatever that cult leader would be like. Are you here to just take advantage of men? He'd be like, huh? Ballet Monday night? How could you accuse me of that? And then just runs away because he's just like, that's just like the reaction that he would have. Anyway,
I think that dude seriously like was in love with ballet. He was a little bit of a ballet Nazi.
I
Obsessed with it. He was.
um
I feel like he literally could have just made a career. Like people were like, "Oh, he's like an amazing choreographer. He knows his shit. He's like a ballet god." And he literally probably could have made like a career. Like he didn't have to start a cult. Like he may have just been doing it for money, but like he could have just made plenty of money just being like a ballet professional.
I like how back then it was such a big deal if somebody started porn. It would like ruin their career. But today it would be like, all right. I mean, that's not like that big of a deal. So you had sex with a camera on. No big deal. Like, and then this guy was
I
in.
don't know. I think it's still like frowned upon from like an employer perspective.
Doug, Kim Kardashian did it. Look at her career.
She's not an employee of like a major company.
But she's.
So, yeah, I don't think
she's
people
a.
want. I don't know.
She's a.
I think there's still a lot of judgment surrounding it.
She's a respected individual in the community.
I don't know about that.
I mean,
she's famous
that's,
for that tape that she put out.
If I asked your average 30-year-old woman who they take fashion advice from, I bet you about 50% of them would have Kim Kardashian in their top 10.
I honestly had no idea she was like a fashion person. I don't know much about her.
No, I mean,
I guess
she's not.
She has a lot of expertise in fashion.
It's just her was so influential that it influenced the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and the Real Housewives of Orange County and the Real Housewives of New York and New Jersey and Philadelphia and Atlanta and Miami and Washington, D.C. I mean, like, there's like this like entertainment, like that channel and Bravo and stuff that like they need an alpha bitch, and it's Kim Kardashian.
But your core argument is Kim Kardashian, you're alluded to the fact that all those Real Housewives of Orange County shows are like a spin-off of her original show, and like people, I don't think respect those housewives. I think they like watch that show to like at least the guys like just make fun of how fake they are, and I think that like there's just like this super materialistic like fake persona that a lot of those people have, and I don't think that like warrants a ton of reverence.
Okay, look at the fappening or whatever when Apple dropped all that content of those celebrities. It was like every single famous celebrity woman was in it.
Who dropped it?
I think there was like some kind of hack in Apple's iCloud like 10 or 12 years ago or so. And it was called The Fappening, which was like all these pictures of these naked celebrities. And some of them were videos, but usually it was just like things they were sending to their lovers and husbands and stuff. And there's an argument to be made that like all of those people, many of those people, that's like all like the Hollywood actors. They're all pretty high regarded. I'm not saying that they're the best, the best role models for children by any means, but even that, even just taking a naked picture in its own way is closer to being a porn star than maybe like okay, let me put it this way. This is delicate. Okay. There were some celebrities who were pictures of them taken like the 60s and 70s and stuff, and that had some ramifications on their career about like should they be considered a moral person or whatever. This is like a discussion that happened maybe 20 years ago, and today that's like no big deal. It's like, oh, you had naked pictures of you like taken, like that's so what. uh I'm saying that the pornography industry is moving much more towards that. Okay, here's my example. You have an actor, Shannon Elizabeth. She was in American Pie. She dated Tom Brady for many years. She just started in. What are you doing? Crumpling up paper in the microphone?
Sorry. Yeah, I have taco bag.
Okay, well, tell your taco bag to shut the fuck up. Anyway, so Shannon Elizabeth stated that she just joined OnlyFans and she made $1 million without uh, without getting naked. And who's that other bitch? Jamie Presley, who's been naked on camera before. She's starting an OnlyFans. She's the one who looks just like, or Margot Robbie looks just like she does.
The ones that don't show a hole on OnlyFans and still walk away with millions, those are the best trolls.
I agree. But okay, so let's put it that way. You have actors who, like Demi Moore, she went topless for striptease, and that was actually a really powerful movie about like women's empowerment and a good mother, or like a lady who's just trying to be a good mother. But it was distorted by the fact that hey, she's gonna be topless on camera, and but like she was up for an Academy Award like 2 years ago. Like, didn't ruin her career. I'm not saying she's like the worst person ever, but like there's a fine line between motion picture nudity and porn. There's just some really bad movies out there are arguably porn. They're just softcore porn. So I'm saying for this guy who was leader, his porn of like the 1970s or 1980s, if it were made in the noughts or the teens, nobody would really care that much.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree with that, and I also think that it is becoming more normalized with like shit like OnlyFans and like that whole garbage where it's like just becoming more widely accepted and not viewed as a big deal because oh look, everybody's showing whole. It's no big deal, but I don't know. In my personal opinion, I think other people's opinion just maybe not the best look. I mean, you could be like, I don't care or whatever. That's fine. People are gonna have different image, like bound like perspectives on whether or not they're comfortable showing whole to any single person on the internet.
I agree with that. I mean,
I don't know. I think people are still like very like judgy of people that do OnlyFans, and yeah, because I think it's just I don't know.
I did it.
It's like you're giving up your like I don't know. You're exposing and like people are like.
It's taboo.
I judge you for it. I'm not saying judgment is correct. But
it's taboo. Okay, so then I agree. It's taboo. Okay, but let me ask you this. I did it. I did it for no money. Hey, Miss Aquarius.
Yeah, I got 3 strikes in a row, Miss Aquarius.
Yeah, you did.
Yesterday on my first 3 strikes. I thought I was gonna do it in the game, and then it all crumbled, but I still.
Dude, he did really well. Miss Aquarius, are you ready?
Yeah, we do great.
All right, Riser, are you ready?
No, you guys can go ahead and do it, or give me like 1 sec.
You take your time. We want to see your skill set.
All right.
Miss Aquarius, how was your day?
It was good. I'm just on leaving. Now I got 3 options. I got like, oh my God, drive me crazy.
You have 3 options?
Options in the meeting. People are in options on this app that I just when I was live at the meeting. So they're live on they're gonna be in the auction on there. 3 people. They're gonna be in the auction.
I understand. I just
be in a Mother's Day. Yeah. Mother's Day roses I got to go to.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, so I got 10.
I just want to make sure I'm correctly. You're saying options?
Yes.
Okay.
UCCOIONS. Yes. I got
Okay.
1 in 10. Somebody's in 1 in 10 minutes. So I'm in their live right now.
All right. Riser, you have an invitation. Miss Aquarius, you of course have an invitation. I'm ready when you both are.
I'm seeing it.
Send it again.
Right. I got.
Invite sent successfully. Riser. Invite sent successfully. Riser, you still not getting it? He'll be back.
There you go.
I don't see the invite. Oh wait, there.
There you go, dog. All right, Riser, we're gonna see your skill against a real expert, Miss Aquarius. She.
We're gonna see if he gets it. Let's go. Come on, Riser. Hey, Riser, let's go. Oh, look at this.
He's got a cow.
Wow.
Are you serious? Yeah.
Yeah, he is. We are serious, dog.
We got a cow.
I messed up right there.
What are you talking about? The ball.
Almost like a cool one, but I don't know.
Dude,
they don't have enough coins. They don't give you enough coins.
The cow is very, very cool.
Yeah.
Kind of better than that one. You can pay $3,000 for it.
Let's go.
Garbage.
There's always just sirens going off in my town all the time. That's not even a big town.
Are there old people where there's like a lot of ambulances?
I mean, there's old people, but
Miss Aquarius, a big lead.
No. I might have to put that
where
on
did she get so many
replay.
points from? What the heck was this?
She got a strike, and it was amazing.
I need to spare here. Oh no.
Devastating. Give me this.
I'm eating tacos. I'm distracted.
I mean, that sounds like a you problem. That's not a Miss Aquarius or me problem.
I'm saying the environmental conditions are not favorable.
All right, again, that's something that you can control. I can't control that. Miss Aquarius putting up numbers. Get it. What a great spare. Folks, if you're watching at home, Miss Aquarius just had an amazing spare.
Thank you, Rabbi. I needed that, Rabbi.
You come at him. All right, the cow. He gets a spare.
Good thing. Yeah.
Get it. Miss Aquarius. Up.
All right.
My man. That was pretty good. Pretty good kickback. That's what
They go to spectacular. Yeah.
Oh, this is tough. Get it.
All right.
Oh,
Yay, you win.
and reload.
I forget it's another person. So you win, we win.
Yes, ma'am.
You got to remember that.
It's all good. It's just a warm-up game. Just a warm-up game.
Cow. I agree.
I'd love to have a custom bowling ball.
Would too.
Time.
Dog.
I don't know.
All right.
Maybe a Stanley Kubrick one.
All right. Room 2.
Yeah. Whatever. No. Oh, Lord.
Riser, did you know that the down all the pins? Oh, get it. Miss Aquarius has a very difficult shot. It though. That's okay. Right, you ready for this?
The pins are
Riser, are you ready for this? Garbage. Terrible. One of the worst throws ever. Let's take. Whenever I see your ball, Riser, I want to stick my fingers in my.
Yo, get the last one. Come on. Miss Aquarius, are you seeing this?
Get it. Great spare. One of the greatest spares we've ever seen. Shot, son. Oh.
Yeah, no spare.
Okay. But yes, 10-point lead on you.
I'm able to roll it really fast.
You think with your tacos? That's not cool.
Good game. Sometimes you can roll like super fast, but I haven't played this game now. Lock in how to quickly roll it everything.
Are you serious? Guys, are you ready for this
I don't
one?
even think that. Have you played online? Like, do people like spin it ever?
What do you mean online?
Like when you play against random people,
Okay,
do they like put spin on the ball?
I have never seen anybody who's been like an expert at doing that. I have seen somebody in archery though who was amazing. Like they got a score of like 250. It was like, oh, they
And
must
they're
have,
shooting the arrows super fast.
yeah, they must have had some kind of bot. I didn't get. This is when I was at my best, and I didn't get within 100 of them. Get it? Nice spare, Riser. And so, oh, that was Mr. Aquarius. Apologies. And so that broke my will to want to play that game because it was like no matter how good I get, somebody's still way better than me. Mr. Aquarius retakes the lead. Riser, what'd you think of that strike?
You want again?
Yeah, what else is new, son? Nice job, Mr. Aquarius. You win, we win, we win, you win. Undefeated in bowling, undefeated in friendship. Now it's time for your friends auction.